Good evening. Welcome to Rominger Radio. Carl Rominger here. Talk line number is 717-916-5189. First time joining this show. As you know, we just talk about politics, current events, a little bit of law from time to time. I do have a JD, although I'm not a practicing lawyer these days, but happily answer your questions about anything political or general. And, of course, like to have a discussion tonight about a lot of different things. And we posted some of that at carlrominger.com earlier, as well as some links to some articles so you could study up. But if you want to jump in here right off the bat, 717-916-5189. This is broadcasted strictly here on Spreaker and on the web. Turns into a podcast when it's done, so you don't have time to listen to the whole thing or you're just checking us out for the first time. Remember, you can easily jump in and out whenever you need to. And then you can catch the whole show later. Again, talk line number, 717-916-5189. And you'll come through here on our handy-dandy Skype connection. And I will accept your calls. And then little rule of the road here. When we do turn you on, so to speak, and what I mean by that is when you jump on and you're a caller, and we have another caller on, you may come onto the line and you can hear everything. But what we want you to do at that point is not talk until the other caller's done, just out of courtesy, which is always good if callers are stacking up, which we'd love to see, 717-916-5189. My challenge to you guys is the Tea Party. Can it survive in its current form? What is its current form? Do the Republicans really need a Tea Party? Has the Tea Party reworked the Republican Party to the point where the party's lurched far enough right that the Tea Party's sort of going to lose its oxygen? Or conversely, has the Republican Party sort of ignored its conservative roots and has the establishment successfully beat off, quote, the Tea Party movement, and is it headed towards the center even farther? What's going on? I've posited that the Republicans have a very difficult time, best I can tell, picking a candidate who is likely to win a national election. Mitt Romney, I guess the argument was that he was palatable in the middle and therefore was electable. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be true, and perhaps that would be the Tea Party folks who would say, I told you so. We have the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. He looked like a prime candidate. Obviously didn't make the cut the last time, got himself embroiled in this little Bridgegate scandal that's going on. Don't know how that's all going to turn out. And if you read some of the political books and follow this sort of thing, a lot of people say Chris Christie's not electable anyhow because he has too many skeletons in his closet. And that when his true level of involvement in all these nefarious things comes out, he won't be electable. But we hear that about all the candidates from some quarters at any given time. So what much stock you put on something like that, I don't know. I do know that when you read the book Double Down, they talk about Mitt Romney's people trying to get from Chris Christie's people the information about his background and how mysteriously it was very difficult to get a lot of information about what he had been up to and what he had done. Also, what causes one to survive in states like New Jersey or Texas and some of these other states over the years, it's been argued that you have to be a strong political operator. I mean, in Illinois, for instance, how many of the governors have gone to jail over the years? The idea basically being that unless you're willing to engage in felonious conduct, it may be impossible to be elected the governor of Illinois. That may or may not be borne out in years to come, and it appears the federal government's usually the one prosecuting those things. But where does Chris Christie stand on that? Well, back to the Tea Party for a second. I really want to know what you guys think about the Tea Party. I want to know what you think about what the direction of the Republican Party should be. And, of course, if anyone wants to talk about the Democratic Party, I'm always happy to tell them what direction they should be headed in as well. Obviously, they're not going to have Barack Obama to run again. They're going to have his record to run against. I think that's the case with health care and the other crises that the ACA has created or will be creating shortly with insurance issues. I expect that the Republican Party will be gladly running against Obama, and the Democratic Party will not be far behind them. Also, Cruz just won the straw poll down there in New Orleans, and the last time around, Perry won that. So interesting to watch. I got a little link up on my at carlrominger.com for tonight's show page, so you can read a full article about that. So if you want to see exactly what happened. One of the other topics I want to cover tonight, by the way, and the talk line number is 717-916-5189, by the way. So feel free to jump on there. if and when you're ready. Again, 717-916-5189, and we'll get you on the air. I guess I'll check Facebook while we're at it, too, and just see where people are in terms of their comments, because we do get a lot of interesting commentary as I talk here on Facebook. And if you want to follow us at Facebook, you can go to the Carl Rominger Show or my personal page, Carl Rominger, and it's Carl with a K. Rominger's Rominger. There's more than one Carl Rominger on Facebook, and I do feel bad for the other guys sometimes because I'm thinking they're probably like, who's this flaming nut that people always mistake me for? And it's an unusual name. When your name's like, you see something about some guy named Robert Smith, you're like, well, it's probably not the Robert Smith I know. When you have a more unusual name like Rominger, and then there's only a few Carl Romingers in the country, and probably only 3 with K's in the Carl, well, then it just goes downhill for those guys from there. Again, talk line number 717-916-5189. And again, we'll get you here live on the air if you want to chit-chat about any particular political topic. Another one, by the way, we talked about Donald Sterling, okay? And I had made the comment, I'm gonna say I was half right. I had said that it seems like Sterling is going to get a free pass in the sense that somebody's going to buy him off to go away. Well, it turns out I was dead wrong about that portion of it, although they are paying him off. But it doesn't appear like they're paying him off well enough to make him go away. So, as you probably know, Sterling drops the N-bomb, secretly recorded by his mistress, who then somehow makes it public through TMZ. And then Sterling gets lambasted publicly, nationally, all over the place. The president jumps on that one because that's an easy topic for him. And what do we get? Well, we get him being drummed out of the NBA, and then we learn that Steve Ballmer of Microsoft Wealth, amongst other things, is going to buy the team for $2 billion. There hasn't been an NBA franchise that's gone for $2 billion ever, and there's nothing to suggest that up until recently one was worth $2 billion except for Steve Ballmer's bid. And I think the next highest bid was like $1.6 billion. So apparently there's this little secret bidding war going on that, we didn't really know about or we weren't made privy to, or however that worked. By the way, if you want to jump in the conversation, and you're welcome to do that at any point, the talk line number is 717-916-5189. 916-5189 in the 717 area code, and we'll get you on here. So somebody give me a call. We'll make sure we got the levels working. My son and I, of course, earlier today, were hard at work at making sure we didn't have any technical difficulties tonight with this internet connection, and also making sure that we didn't have any other difficulties with the Skype connection. So prior to this show, we have a little tape where he'll sing you a song. I sent him to one of the bedrooms with the phone. He thought that was hysterical and a fun thing to do, although he didn't quite cooperate the way I would have liked, from a true technical help. Hey, you got to work with what you got. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we did. We put the 4-year-old to work. I don't know if that's legal in this state or not, if I have to compensate him or if I have to go to talk to the Department of Labor and Industry now, or I had to get workers' comp insurance to have him help me with this. I don't know. We'll just call it a family farm, and then I think children as young as 8 can pick tobacco. It's a tobacco farm, if anybody's asking. I saw that in the news the other day, and I said, kids as young as 8 are working on farms. Well, you know what? I think that's how rural farm life works. Now, do I condone somebody having their 8-year-old work 12 hours a day on their tobacco farm? No, I don't really condone that. Do I have a problem with somebody having their 8-year-old work 2 or 3 hours a day on their tobacco farm? Probably not. I got to imagine that kids raised with a little bit of work probably turn out better than I did, or most of the kids growing up today will turn out. So that's just a thought, but I believe that to be the case. I know when I was a kid, I actually did chores, and I know that my brother and I used to take shovels around and ask people if they had any snow that could be shoveled every time there was a big snowfall. And I've sat here in Carlisle over the last couple of years and noticed that even when we do get a big snowfall, there are no kids with shovels coming. I mean, we have snow days galore these days, but there's not 1 or 2 kids out there with a shovel asking, knocking on doors. And, we have a business downtown, and it used to get even 15 years ago, we'd get a couple kids stop by during any snowstorm, and that's dried up in the last decade completely. And I don't think my observation would be alone. I think a lot of you would probably back me up on that leaf rakers and lawn mowers and kids who want to do odd jobs to make a little money just aren't around anymore. And I think that strong work ethic in kids is important to instill so that they do work. and do want to work and accomplish things. But, hey, what do I know? 717-916-5189 if you want to chime in. Anyhow, so back to the lesson we're trying to teach our kids. If you drop the N-bomb, you will get suspended at school. And if you drop the N-bomb, you will get beat up by somebody at school. And if you drop the N-bomb, you will be punished. Oh, wait, well, one time this guy did it and accidentally triggered the windfall sale of his sports team to approximately 2 times what anybody would have even estimated it's worth, and probably closer to, if you remember, I think they were saying that the team was worth around $600 million, maybe $800 million when this first broke. Some people less, some people a little more, but I never even heard the billion figure thrown around. So the $2 billion windfall seems interesting. Now, of course, he's got a lawyer. His wife has a letter from a lawyer or him saying he's not competent or giving her power to transact this business. He's saying that he doesn't agree to it, and now he's suing as of Friday the NBA for $1 billion. So back when I said there may be some extra money on the side, that might be the extra money on the side. They'll settle this lawsuit, and the NBA will grease him some more money. So instead of getting $2 billion, he and his family will get like $2.2 or $2.4 billion out of the deal. I don't know. I don't really know how that's going to play out. But any which way you look at it, I think the lesson is that one need not think too hard and long about what the consequence is going to be if you say something bad, because apparently you can always parlay it around somehow. Now, we also have, and earlier in this week, talked a little bit about Edward Snowden. Of course, the interview from Wednesday night has happened with Brian Williams. So if you want to chime in on Snowden, we'd love to hear what you have to say. 717-916-5189. There was a lot of interesting material coming out there where he was talking about his training and the fact that he was talking to and giving lectures to the intelligence agencies. He doesn't think he's a traitor, and he thinks he's a patriot. Of course, I'm always curious, again, what people have to say on that. 717-916-5189 if you want to chime in and tell us what you think about Edward Snowden. And, of course, if you're just joining us, I really also want to hear what you guys think about. Oh, good. Everybody says it's coming in clear. That's what I'd like to hear. Now let's get a Skype caller on here so we can test the Skype angle as well. So even if you didn't really want to be a caller and you don't think you know anything to talk about, just call in. We'll chit-chat so we can test this thing out. 717-916-5189. And I'll take your call to get you on the air here, make you famous. More importantly, we'll then know if we work the bugs in the Skype connection out as well. Because I also have this other handy-dandy secondary microphone now that supposedly feeds back into the Skype caller. So instead of them sort of hearing through the computer, they're going to get a secondary feed, and it's supposedly going to be a more pleasurable experience for the person who calls in on Skype. Again, 717-916-5189. I think I can ultimately do a podcast on just about how to set up a podcast. What equipment should I use? How do I do it? Now back to Snowden. So I think the most interesting thing he was saying is that in real time, once you activate a internet connection, he can follow you in real time, and that the way things have been thinned down, the way we're being told about them, the level of surveillance of an individual who's been, quote, targeted is so astronomical and so easily done that it just is not what the government would have you believe, or not as easy as the government would have you believe. I shouldn't say as easy, as hard. We don't really hardly know anything. We just bulk collect this, and then we have to go back through it. I think he was basically saying if you're a target, he can just lock right into you and just start going. And why not, right? I mean, if you can, you can. But there's no court oversight. One of the things I was pointing out, and we have the article up on the website as well, and I'll rehash this for those of you who didn't hear Wednesday's show. You can always go back and listen to it, but I think this is an important point. Congress was lied to by the director of the NSA openly, and only after Snowden revealed this information to become clear that he had lied at public hearings. Now, some people say, well, some of the senators knew he was lying, so that's okay, or some of the congressmen knew he was lying, so that's okay. I argue there's no effective oversight when there's no congressional oversight. But other people say, well, there's at least court oversight of the secret court. And, of course, then we learned that the United States Supreme Court was misled by the administration, by the Obama administration, through the Solicitor General, who only discovered after he argued that, in fact, they were not doing what they represented to the Supreme Court they were doing in terms of sharing who they targeted with defendants who were ultimately tried or sought with information from these secret NSA wiretaps. So the Fourth Amendment was clearly being violated. The court, on a technicality, declined to decide the case, basically saying nobody had standing because there would be people with standing at some point when this information was actually used against somebody to test the matter. And the court specifically said they relied upon, they actually quoted what the government told them was going on, and therefore said there was no need for this lawsuit. It was also discovered based on some other information that other people probably did have standing based on how the data was collected. But again, it shows that the Supreme Court does not and cannot effectuate oversight because they have to trust the executive branch when they tell them, and the Congress cannot effectuate oversight because they have to trust the executive branch when they tell them something, and they've both been blatantly lied to. And the only reason we know about the lies is because Snowden came forward. Now, you can imagine that the next time around that Snowden is not going to exist. There's not going to be somebody likely. It's taken all these years and all this treasure and all this time for one person to come forward and say, hey, here's what your government is perpetrating on you. And look what kind of hot water he's in. Of course they want to punish him. They're going to bring that guy back to America if they can and hit him with sticks like a piñata until he falls to pieces. Why do we want to do that? Well, John Kerry says, well, man up, clever reference to Bradley Manning, and come back to the United States. Well, that would be mentally insane for him to do that. And while I think he should perhaps risk some level of punishment for what he did, I think he should ultimately be pardoned by the president. But you're not going to see that because the administrative branch is scared to death that any leniency for Snowden just invites further acts of treason in the future, or as the case may be, leaking which exposes government lies. And wouldn't it be arguable that people who lie to Congress and lie to courts and circumvent the three-party checks and balance system they taught us about in grade school are somehow guilty of treason? I'm just throwing that one out there. Maybe not. Maybe it is okay to lie to Congress, and maybe it is okay to lie to the Supreme Court if it's to protect the national interest and safety. Of course, if that's the case, why don't we just scrap the whole Constitution? Other topics I wanted to talk about, whatever else you guys like to talk about, I always tell you. I also want to talk about, and I'm probably saying this right, Gangnam Style. So this is the new cultural norm. They now have 1 billion YouTube hits for Justin Bieber, but Gangnam Style apparently just hit 2 billion. So even though Justin Bieber has this crazy 1 billion YouTube hits for the track Baby, Gangnam Style, which is a South Korean rapper, Psy, P-S-Y, I think it's Psy, I don't know. And it's kind of a song, it's, you watch the video, it's not exactly spectacular. We've embedded that in the page at carlrominger.com in case you haven't seen it, because just because they say 2 billion views, there's probably someone in Missouri or a girl in a dorm room somewhere or a Korean kid in Seoul who's watched the thing cumulatively 10,000 times themselves. So 2 billion views doesn't mean 2 billion people have watched it. On the other hand, it could be like at The Office where somebody puts it up and 10 people see it. So getting those counts exact. But nonetheless, it's been downloaded 2 billion times, which means pretty much anybody with minimum cultural literacy probably recognizes the song. It's also played up in so many different parodies and used again and again in various comedies and things like that, that one probably has heard it even if you don't know it by its name. That's kind of where I was on it when I caught this. And I'm like, oh, I've heard this before. I had not seen the video, though. So I was like 2 billion and 10. And why I bring it up, and I think this is an interesting point, we have what we call cultural literacy. My mother used to say, you need to read the classics. You need to read this book so you'll be a part of the canon of literature, so you'll understand the world around you. By the way, if anybody wants to comment on any of the things I'm talking about, it's 717-916-5189. Again, 717-5189. 717-916-5189. I don't know if I can do two things at once or not. I did manage, by the way, to just crack a can of 7 Gates Pale Ale, which is from Springhouse Brewing in Conestoga, Pennsylvania. That's actually, in case you're wondering, Lancaster County, if you don't know that. It's a local brew, and they've been doing it for a while down there. Now, they've got a place open in Lancaster City, and, of course, they have their original spot. A lot of people have been going crazy about this peanut butter beer they did. But I think Seven Gates Pale Ale, which is one of their originals, is just a classic. And it's an easy drinking beer that goes down good with a radio show. So if you want to run out and grab one, I recommend it. But don't leave your internet connection if you do. Of course, we have apps for the iPhone and we have apps for your Android and your tablets. So the Spreaker app will play to all those. And, of course, Spreaker now has the ability for me to brand my own app as well. So I'm looking at that. But let's talk about cultural literacy back here for a second again. So we're supposed to all have these shared experiences. And so, it's like movie lines. I have a friend named Bill, and Bill likes to make references to movies. And some of them I get, and some I don't. I know a lot of movie lines myself, but he's really good at it. And he was explaining to me that working with some younger people at his workplace, he finds them sometimes staring at him, wondering what he's referring to. Because he'll say something and he'll use a movie line, to kind of maybe cajole the person or make a little humor about the situation or to motivate the person. And boy, they don't know all the old movie lines because you start to feel old. Well, some of you listening probably all have heard of Casablanca, right? And you probably know a few lines out of there, and you probably know how the story ends or what happens. Some of you that are a little younger or less film buffy probably nonetheless all know Yippee-Ki-Yay, You Know What by Bruce Willis in Die Hard. And these are not great cultural points, but the point is you can make references or allusions and exchange information. So even the Wall Street Journal now has an article about the underwear gnomes, where they refer to the underwear gnomes from South Park. And I'm sure some of you have watched South Park. I'm sure some of you have been horrified by South Park. But there's an episode where there's these gnomes who are stealing one of the kids' underwear, and they finally figure out what's going on, and they follow the gnomes. And when they get to the gnomes and they confront them about this pile of underwear, the gnome shows them a chart where it's a pile of underwear plus question mark equals a pile of money. And basically says, once we figure out what the question mark is, we're going to be rich. And it's kind of funny because it's now become a business cliche. So if somebody pitches you a plan, you can be like, this is kind of like an underwear gnome situation, or boy, these guys remind me of the underwear gnomes. They're telling you they're going to do something, and they're telling you it's going to make a lot of money, but they seem to be missing an essential ingredient, and it becomes shorthand. Well, that's a cultural literacy, right? You have to know who the characters in South Park are. You at least have to know enough about it to know about what the underwear gnomes are, and therefore make that reference. So you can, in one article, they made a reference to, this is like the underwear gnomes. And then, of course, later there's an article explaining how isn't it interesting that a South Park episode has now become part of business parlance. Well, the same thing about the classics. When people say he's an Atticus Finch, we know who they're referring to. We usually do if we've read that book by Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. If somebody says, he's like the Fonz, well, again, you're dating yourself maybe a little bit, but you're saying he's cool. Maybe. Point is, where will cultural literacy take us when YouTube, for instance, first of all, thins the herd, so to speak? I mean, there's just so many fewer things that people are going to see because there's just so much more to watch, so the commonalities are going to be lower. But more interestingly, isn't it interesting that it's a South Korean rapper who's now been viewed more times than anybody else in the world on the YouTube format, which has a phenomenal number of views? And so you're more likely to connect with somebody with a reference to the Gangnam Style video than you are on a lot of other references or allusions to TV shows, because this crosses cultures and boundaries. And so cultural literacy in the internet age is going to be defined a little differently. I don't know how that's going to be defined, but there's going to be less commonalities in what people view and what they digest. But on the other hand, when there are commonalities, they're not going to necessarily be limited to one location or one culture. And that creates for an interesting cross-pollination. So I just think that's an interesting fact of life, and we have to keep our pulse on it. Obviously, technology is always changing the way we work and think and all those good things. And there's no doubt in my mind that it is. If you guys want to join me here on the air, it's 717-916-5189. Again, whatever you want to talk about, I really want to see if anybody wants to bite into this Tea Party question. I want to hear from the Tea Party folks, and I want to hear what you guys have to say because, and I'm not a not Tea Party guy, I guess. I'm sure some people would say my credentials are too libertarian or too liberal for me to be a what do I want to say? For me to be a Tea Party person. But on the other hand, I kind of disagree with that because I think of myself as libertarian, and I think of myself as someone who doesn't like big government, doesn't like a strong government, doesn't like government telling everybody what to do or when to do it. But I'm not the law and order conservative type, nor do I think the Republican Party should be meddling in or spending phenomenally large amounts of time on the social issues in this day and age. The big issues are the spending and all those sorts of things going on. So, I'd really like to get somebody who's a hardcore, the Tea Party way or the highway, who also has sort of what I call that Republican conservative law and order bent, and maybe I would tell them they're not really a member of the Tea Party. I mean, they'll tell me they are, and I'll tell them they're not really a member of the Tea Party because the true Tea Party is when it was formed, at least I thought, was more about the best way to define it is, stop spending my money, stop taking my money, stop spending and taking my money whenever you can. I thought that's what it was, and maybe it is, but it seems to me that the Tea Party has somehow morphed into, a Christian coalition version that we used to have in the Republican Party. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, that there was a Christian coalition. I think they did a lot of great things for the Republican Party. But let's talk about that. Was that really what the Tea Party was about? Or was the Tea Party about, again, saving the country from runaway spending? I think that's what it was for. I think that the original plan was, and it was to sidestep. Let's set aside for a minute, Republicans quit fighting about abortion and birth control and, school vouchers and all those things for a moment, and let's just go back and worry about taxing and spending. And let's take the Democrats on in an area where a lot of people in the middle agree. And the original Tea Party was not Republican. It was not Democrat. It was just a group of people who were getting, to lack of a better word, getting pissed off with how the government was being run and getting upset about what was going on, and said, "Hey, I would like to get involved, and I would like to just see government cut back." And so they could set aside because they couldn't all agree. Should abortion be legal? Should prayer be permissible in schools? Let's just set those issues aside and go with core financial issues. And so that's my definition of what the Tea Party is or should be. I don't know. You tell me if the Tea Party is a little different. Also, at some point tonight, we're going to get my mom here on the air because I want to check in on her, see what's going on with her garden, and also just get her opinion on a few things. I'm always curious to see what she thinks about the world. Obviously, she comes from a slightly different viewpoint. If I was going to be a college professor, I could point out that, she's a female and therefore she's a different worldview than a male, and she's older, so she's a different worldview than a young person and all those kinds of things. But as you know, I think it's just common sense that everybody has a slightly different view of the world based on their experiences. And it's always interesting to hear what our parents have to say about these things. Obviously, I think they're owed a certain level of respect. Don't always agree with my mom, and I've told her so. On the other hand, her opinions usually seem to be pretty well formed based on information that's available and life experience. And, sort of like when I asked her about, when I was doing WHP 580 years ago, I'd asked her when Obamacare was first starting out. She was right up there on the death panels. And it's funny, because at her age, as someone who's going to be using Medicare, which was, of course, the original Obamacare, right? The original model of social medicine in the United States. And that's another one I could digress on for a second, by the way. How many of you out there intend to collect Social Security? How many of you out there believe you're entitled to and paid into the Medicare system? And I know you all believe you did. But there's nothing that makes me laugh more than a Republican who's 32 telling me that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and Medicare is evil and that all government socialized programs are bad. And then you find a 64-year-old Republican who's eagerly looking forward to being able to begin collecting Social Security and getting onto Medicare and then getting their supplement in place so they don't have to worry about the cost of health care any longer, and they can start getting that money they paid into Social Security back, which, of course, everybody's under illusion is all being held in some big account somewhere and not really just a wealth redistribution scheme. And I could digress about that a little bit more. But anyhow, so people of different ages and people with different life experiences obviously have slightly different ways of looking at these things. But I thought the Tea Party did was say, I don't care if you go to a fundamentalist church in Waco, Texas, or a Catholic church in Massachusetts, or no church at all in Idaho. If you agree with us that the government is too big and the government needs to be pared back, then vote with us because we're going to pick candidates that are going to focus on that. And the social issues can sort themselves out, but that's really not what the Tea Party is about. But I think the Tea Party has become and is used increasingly by those who claim to be representatives of it to forward social issues that the founding fathers of the Tea Party so many years ago, of just a few years ago, would be like, no, this is not possible. This is not the Tea Party that I knew, or this is not the Tea Party that I created, or this is not the Tea Party that I thought I should be a member of or have anything to do with. I really, really do believe that would be the case. But are we going to get any of those folks? I don't know. I really don't know. And what I mean, what did the Tea Party really stand for? I think, I'll give you another example of this. Romney where was he really on government spending? Where was he really on allocation of resource? Was he a rhino, Republican in name only? I always felt that way. And I always felt that's part of the reason why the Republicans couldn't win. On the other hand, if the Republicans pick a candidate who is embracing and wrapped up in social issues, then I don't think they're going to get very far. So who do you have to find? You have to find somebody who will speak well enough to the Republican conservatives. But let's look at what the Pennsylvania governor did here recently. And I'll use the state of Pennsylvania as an example because that's where I'm broadcasting from, even though I know from looking at the listeners, not everybody's from Pennsylvania. But our Republican governor here recently decided not to appeal gay marriage ruling by the federal court, saying it would be a high legal burden and it wasn't worth the effort because it was a high legal burden. Now, I've joked about this before here that it'll be ironic if the Supreme Court of the United States ultimately says it's up to the states and they can still make decisions on gay marriage. And were that to happen, he'd be in the worst of all political positions. But I've maintained that he's the new Arlen Specter, who was a Republican senator here for years, who used to be a Democratic senator, and then who later became a Democratic senator again right at the end of his career. And one of the criticisms of Arlen Specter was that he simply stuck his finger in the air and felt which way the wind was blowing and then adopted that particular political situation. And I think that's what our governor did. He put his finger in the air and said, I'm not getting anywhere with any voters on the social issue of gay marriage. Now, he ticked off a whole bunch of Republicans, not all the Republicans, but a whole bunch of them, and a few Democrats who really wanted him to appeal this. I know we had a picture in the newspaper of two men kissing. I've heard people complaining about that. How can they force that on us? How can they even put that picture on there? That was so revolting, and this thing is so terrible. But what the governor knows, and you know and I know, and this is a move that's been pulled by both parties on their respective extreme wings so many times, it's laughable. He knows that no matter what he does on gay marriage, he can count on your vote. So if you're a Republican, you're going to vote for the Republican, and the more likely you are to be upset with that ruling, right? The more likely you are to be upset with that ruling, the less likely you are to find anybody else palatable in our two-party system that you could vote for. So you either got to vote for the Republican who stabbed you in the back, or you've got to vote for the Democrat, who's the enemy, or you can vote for nobody or a write-in vote, but you might as well not even voted, and then that enemy Democrat might win. And it's the devil you can stand versus the devil you're more afraid of, or the lesser of two evils, as I always say when it comes to voting in our modern representative democracy. So what do we end up with? We end up with the Republican Party not harming or punishing a candidate for rejecting the base on an important issue to the base like this, because we know that the base voters have no choice but to vote for that candidate. Democrats do the same thing. You know, Obama promises the world to the liberal wing. And some people would say, oh, he delivered a lot. And the answer is he has delivered a lot, but he's also sort of played middle of the road. He had the surge in Afghanistan. He has not done some environmental things that the left wing was promised. He didn't close Guantanamo Bay like he promised. Political reality being what it is. He also knows, however, that the Sea Shepherds or the other, Green Party wannabe leftists that would love to vote for the Green Party in most places have no choice because they have two candidates, generally speaking. They've got a Republican who they'd never vote for, or the guy who lied to them 5 times in the last election cycle and who they dutifully voted for, and they'll dutifully vote for him again and their party. Why do you think the two-party system is so prevalent, or why the two parties work so hard to keep it like it is? Because essentially each side can pander to their base and then ignore their base and or lie to their base and or whatever else they want to do, and then simply go back to the well again and again and again. And I've said this before: our politicians lie to us, and like a wife who just can't admit that her husband is cheating on her and therefore takes him back again and again, we all do the same thing. What would stop that is if we could have meaningfully create an open primary and open elections where the two parties simply can't dominate, where the two parties can't just what's the worst thing that happens to a Republican seat, right? It goes to the Democrats. What's the worst thing that happens to a Democrat? They lose a seat to the Republicans. They know this. They agree to these things. They actually do gerrymandering where they would cut up state districts to make sure, for instance, that this one stays Republican and this one stays Democrat, and they cut agreements on that. Now, the person who's in charge of the Republican the state legislatures, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, when they're redistricting and they're doing this, obviously the guy with the upper hand takes advantage of it and scores a few extra points. But there's a lot of horse trading that goes on, and those two parties make sure that in public. It kind of reminds me of some wrestlers, back in the locker room. Like, all right, here's what I'm going to do. It's your turn to win, but I'm still going to slice you a little bit. And about round 2, I'm going to whack your head into the turnbuckle, just so you know. But I'm still not trying to win it. I understand what's going to happen. And then the other guy says, okay, but then if I'm going to do that, then I expect to be able to give you a super fly drop kick at least once, maybe round 3. And then I'm taking you down right after that. But I just want one big move like that just to, appease my fans as well. And then they go out there and they put on a really good show, and you watch them fly through the air and hit each other over the head with with steel folding chairs, and everybody claps their hands and says, yeah, it's not real, it's fake. Well, that's kind of what goes on in U.S. politics when you have two parties who fix the system and fix the votes and fix what district you live in. And make sure that the gerrymandering protects the long-term health of various constituencies. So I hate to seem negative, I hate to seem negative about the state of American politics all the time, but the reality is we're not being sold an honest bill of goods. 717-916-5189 if you want to call in here. Again, if you're just joining us, 717-916-5189. We'll keep going until 9 p.m. This is Carl Rominger here on Rominger Radio. We're all still looking for one of you sports experts to call in and give us the rundown on what's going on in sports. And, of course, we still want to talk about Donald Sterling a little bit later here in the show. So if you do want to call in about him or the Tea Party or anything else, we invite you to do so. I think what we're most curious about right now is where you stand. I want to know where people stand on this Tea Party versus the Republican Party. I mean, is it the same party? Is the Tea Party really losing to the Republicans, or have the Republicans come so far right? Is it a good thing for the Republican Party or a bad thing for the Republican Party? I think I kind of laid out my theories there. I would say generally, in some respects, it's been a good thing for the Republican Party. But I also feel like the Tea Party has now become the tool of, whichever constituency within the Republican Party wants to claim to control it. And, of course, then I've told you just a minute ago that I don't really trust either party because all they're doing is horse trading in the back room to keep each other alive. And it's not unrealistic to believe that at the end of the day, neither one is going to stamp the other one out, nor is either one going to let, and collectively they do this all the time, they go together to make sure no third party gets on a ballot. And they rig the systems to keep open elections down to make sure, again, that we don't end up with more than two parties. And if a third-party candidate makes it on the ballot in a lot of states, the first thing she can agree upon or be ganged up upon is by the party. Heck, even here in Pennsylvania, a Republican tried to get on the ballot against the governor, and the Republicans went to bat to knock him off because they didn't want a primary. We wouldn't, heaven forbid, want anybody to talk about what we did. I mean, the second largest tax increase in the history of Pennsylvania was signed by a Republican governor, who then immediately attacks the Democratic candidate as going to tax you. And then the narrative is, oh, well, the Republican guy only had to tax you because of what the Democratic guy did before him. And he created this situation where there was no way out of it but to sign this giant fuel tax bill. And boy, oh boy, we are paying the fuel tax. If you people watch the pump and start watching it versus other states, watch Pennsylvania prices, and watch as they start to escalate, because the other thing they did was make it so this cap wouldn't come off completely until after when? Oh, the election in November. Yeah, imagine that. Another one of my favorite things, I heard one of our senators, I think it was Toomey from the state, talking about it. The Congress intentionally keeps on the books a law that says that they will reduce the spending on Medicare by 27%. Across the board. And it's renewed every 6 months or every year. And it's never actually done because the doctors would all go bankrupt and the medical system would collapse. But we pretend that it's going to be done because that allows for all the budget projections to include this false cut in one of the greatest entitlements and largest line items in the federal budget. It's sort of like if you said to your wife or your husband, listen, I'm going to stop smoking, and that stop smoking is going to take place in just a few months. So 3 months from now, I'm done smoking, and so my $100 a week cigarette habit will be over, and we will have an extra $5,000 a year. So when you're doing the family budget, just keep in mind that 3 months from now, I will not be spending $100 a week on cigarettes anymore. I will be done. I'm also going to give up beer for another $100 a week. So we will have $10,000 more to budget in the annual budget. So you can spend about $800 more a month than we currently have as you budget it out. And your wife comes back and goes, good, guess what? I got good news. I've balanced our budget. If we do everything the way it looks, our mortgage will be paid, our insurance will be paid, we'll have food for the kids, and we'll have an extra $100 every week. Well, when 3 weeks comes along, the husband says, whoa, wait a minute. I remember when I told you I was going to, 3 months from now, it's been renewed. We've renewed the cut. It's going to be 3 or 6 months from now before I do that. And that's how the federal government comes up with these crazy projections. And it turns out, when you listen to these guys that are willing to tell you the truth, they're not just doing that with Medicare. They're doing it with all other kinds of entitlements. And they're doing it with all kinds of other automatic increases. So when they claim they cut something, they haven't actually taken any money out of the federal budget. All they've done is knocked back an already agreed upon increase. So they'll have, for instance, said that Department of Interior's budget for whatever shall go up 10% every year for the next 10 years. Okay? That's compounded, by the way. It's going up 10% every year for the next 10 years, so it's going to be more than double in a decade. Okay, we're going to cut $100 million off their budget. So they're only going to be allowed to go up 9% in the next year, which will cause that ripple through all those other increases to add up to a few $100 million. And therefore, we've cut the federal budget by $150 million over the next 5 years. They haven't cut anything. They've cut what they projected they were planning to spend in the future and just dialed back otherwise automatic increases. But nobody's spending less money, and it's still going up every year. It's absolutely ludicrous what the government can do and how they can do it. I've often said that if you and I said, if we ran a company and we made statements like the government did to our investors, the SEC would sue us. We'd be criminally prosecuted by the Justice Department, and we would go to jail for materially false, misleading statements, which would violate the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and the Clayton Act and every known securities law at the federal level is violated openly by Congress and the administration at all hours and at all times. How they treat information with the public and how they hide things and give us false projections and make material misstatements of fact. But because they're politicians, that's okay. So keep this in mind. If you want to go buy AT&T stock, the CEO of AT&T is greatly restrained what he and she can say. Even truthful things, they're greatly restrained on what they can say because it might be an unfair advantage or it might be stock manipulation or it might cause ripples in the market, and it's worthy of criminal penalties that these people should go to jail for doing this. And then, at the same token, if a politician did the exact same thing about the federal budget or the State of the Union or any other aspect of legislation or law, he or she probably just gets reelected, and at worst, they have an opponent point out their hypocrisy, which is lost on the voters and apparently of no concern to anybody. Now, of course, we can't criminalize political statements because if a person wants to lie in politics, I guess that's their protected First Amendment right. But it's just ironic that the same conduct that a politician can do would land a business executive in jail. Maybe that's why business people don't come to government or government people don't go to business. I don't know the answer to that one. 717-916-5189. This is Carl Rominger here with Rominger Radio. Again, 717-916-5189 if you're just joining us. Would like to get somebody on here to just give this Skype a little rundown, make sure we're getting good levels and that it's working. So, again, if you want to be our first caller for tonight, 717-916-5189, and we'll chat up what's going on with whatever you want to talk about. Like I said, I'm interested in this Tea Party thing. I'm really interested in where that's going to be going. I'm very, very interested in Sterling and the sale of this NBA team for $2 billion. When I saw that headline, I just about passed out. I was like, how can this guy go so 360? I mean, how does that work exactly? I mean, how do you go from making no money theoretically on the sale whatsoever to windfall in like 13 seconds? And apparently that's how you do it. Okay, good. Listen, that's what I like to hear. That's coming through. People keep posting me on Facebook that things are coming through nicely tonight, which is good. You know, these online radio shows are interesting because you got to get all the technology working right. And we had a little trouble Wednesday with some chop. I think the upload speeds were actually having problems with Comcast, and I actually checked a few other locations. That was going on all over the Carlisle area. They've got some nifty little buttons down here at the bottom of the online console, so I can see what my net uplink speed, and I can see the net ping that repeatedly does, memory usage and CPU usage, just to make sure that the computer's not getting overwhelmed. And that's actually pretty useful because those things were actually turning red on Wednesday, and that's when I knew something was wrong because I'm going, somebody's saying it's choppy, and I'm going, oh, I don't know, I can't tell. And that's when I learned what those buttons did. And they don't really do anything. You can't click on them. They just sort of give you some information. I don't know what you're supposed to do, though. What am I supposed to call the tech team? Hey, 4-year-old boy, get over here. Anson, get over here. Figure out what's going on with our internet connection. Call Comcast, reset the router. I don't care what the hell you have to do. Just get it done. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Maybe someday. But as you know, anytime you have internet problems and you're in the middle of something mission critical, good luck. It also reminds me whenever I call big company, but I just think this is a line. You'll have to excuse me. We're having a little trouble getting our system running up today. And actually, I sometimes think it's a line, but then after my own experience with laptops and computers and other things, I go, now it seems like every time you actually want to access something, it junks out on you or times out on you, or Windows decides, my favorite personal one is Windows decides to update, right? Because you didn't see that thing down there in the corner that said, we'll update and reboot to update in 6 minutes. Like, dear Windows, I am not always watching that little corner thing, and I would prefer you ask me to update. But then again, if we ask people for updates, absolutely, that's where all the zombie computers come from, because nobody does the updates. Probably myself included in that little issue. Well, let's see if we can get my mom on the phone here. So let's experiment a little bit. As you guys know who listen regularly, my mom is a good source of recipes, and we're going to start getting those posted again. I think she's into the gardening right now, so we shall see. We'll see if we can get her on here. So, all right, we'll just trim that down a little bit until we know she's on the air. By the way, talk line number here is 717-916-5189. 717-916-5189.
Hello.
Hello, Mother. Hello, Mother. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm enjoying the beautiful day here.
Is it sunny out there?
About 80 degrees and sunny all day long.
Well, now you live up outside of Buffalo, in between Buffalo and Erie, on Lake Erie and Brockton area. So for people who don't know, and of course, I'm down here in Carlisle, and it was a beautiful day. Anson and I went out for a couple of walks and had a good old time, and he helped me, of course, with this setup, and I think things are running pretty smooth. You sound good. Good.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I got to tell you, we are the Miami of the North here in Western New York.
And why do they call it that?
Because we have some really beautiful days, and our sunshine. Actually, we have more sunshine than many places in the South do.
Yeah.
It's amazing, but that's the truth of the matter.
And if you were selling real estate up there, you'd probably also still have to disclose that, between October and almost now, it sometimes gets a little blustery and cold in the Buffalo area, but we won't hold you to that. Yeah. Did the lake?
It does.
Did the lake freeze over this year? Do you know?
Yes, it did. It was a terrific amount of ice. The lake was almost covered, totally covered, and it took the ice boom that keeps the ice from getting into the electrical generators the generators that make the electricity.
Yeah.
It was one of the latest dates ever. It was like May 3rd or 4th or 5th, someplace in there where they started to pick the booms up. That's very late. Usually it's April.
This is
the last week in April.
This is what the president would call climate disruption brought on by global warming or climate change or whatever they're calling it these days, because we can't be fooled that just because it was the most ice in years and it was cold until May, that we're not about to burst into a big ball of fire due to global warming. So I just want to caution you on that, okay?
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And of course,
very much.
Yes, well, And by the way, you live in New York State, and I was up to visit you not too long ago, and I was pointing out how unsafe I felt thanks to the New York Safe Act, because I felt like I didn't even know which guns I could bring along or not bring along, or which gun would be legal or not legal, thanks to the relative loss of the Second Amendment in your great state. And then what else did we discover, Mom? Something about boating, right? You now have to take a class in order to boat.
Yeah, the kids do. In order to boat, younger kids have to have some sort of a card now to show that they have had some safety training. New York is full of that. I mean, it's constantly. We have more and more and more rules and regulations, none of which people can keep up with, because if you did that, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, and I just felt that way when I was driving up there. And then when I called to talk about a boat rental with some guy, which we didn't, we fished from the shore anyhow, but thought, I'll just investigate it. and they're explaining to me that you need some kind of safety certification now. Although I was told they have some like quick class you can take, But as you can imagine, you show up at 6 a.m. in the morning because you want to get your boat, and then the guys to come out and give you a 20-minute test or something before you can use it. And I understand the concept that people want people to be safe, and nobody wants kids to drown and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, if that's the complete logic, then if we just fill in all the swimming pools, we could probably eliminate a couple hundred deaths a year to drowning.
Well, that's true. I mean, every activity has its risks, and if you stop everything from going on, or you had rules in place, like I said, you'd never get out of bed in the morning because it would be something that you would be violating, a rule of some sort or another. I don't know. We just try to get on with life, and it gets tougher and tougher.
So, are you following any politics these days? You got any sense on who the Republicans are going to pick for a presidential candidate? Or are you as mystified as everybody else in America right now?
I'm mystified because I have no idea, who has the overall,
Yeah, it doesn't seem
that people like him, and people like the person in general, because everybody has strong feelings one way or another about people, and they're all different people. I mean, it's not like everybody likes one guy and doesn't like the other one. That's
Well, and I think we're suffering. I think we're suffering from some level of fragmentation that's been brought on by broader access to news outlets and knowledge. With the internet, people can really find somebody they like, research somebody they like. It's going to be interesting now because
I agree.
Supreme Court has lifted a lot of the funding restrictions, so we're going to see a lot more money thrown into these races down the road here.
Really?
Yeah, and
wow.
so that's going to allow for people to assert advantages maybe that they couldn't have before. But what I keep my thumb on, and I say if this happens, this should not happen, but it's probably the ironically thing what will happen is they're talking about another Bush v. Clinton election with Jeb Bush of Florida versus Hillary Clinton, your senator in New York, who's not really from New York, but somehow you guys voted her in. I'm sure you don't have to tell us that you didn't vote for her. That would be my guess, but then again, maybe it was a woman solidarity thing, and I would understand that.
No, and she happened to live just outside of New York City. She made her home there about a year before she became the senator. Yeah,
and so what I find interesting is if we have Clinton versus Bush, what that suggests is that we're really just an oligarchy where certain families now control the reins of power, and they just trade power back and forth as is convenient with whoever can fool the populace into believing that they're the one at the moment.
As they have done in Europe for years.
Yeah, and so we may truly we may have created a political class which has now intermixed with the ultra. There's no how do I say this? There's no coincidence that there's a list of like billionaire pals of Obama and billionaire pals of Clinton and billionaire pals of Bush and billionaire pals of Mitt Romney and other prominent Republicans, and they all are the same 20 people that they're all friends with, that are ultra wealthy, and who don't really play a party per se. We see Warren Buffett cropping up, giving Obama some good points on something, but Warren Buffett's also backing certain Republicans. We've got a whole, I think it was Perlman that Clinton was flying around on the jet with, and I'm trying to remember who else. But my point is, it looks like if you do this, it's sort of like Russia. There's 20 guys worth billions of dollars, and they have a few hand-selected politicians that they hang out with, and those guys trade power back and forth. In this case, these families, it's like we're back to the Habsburgs and the Rothschilds.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So
that's what your grandfather always told me about Europe and the reigning families in Europe, and that's exactly what you have here now, except that they're American.
Right.
So.
And And so I don't know. Anyhow, I just find I hope, I cross my fingers and hope that when we run around the world, remember Truman became president, okay? And if you read McCullough's Truman, I don't know if you've read that one yet or not. But he actually was a farmer and rode a plow and snuck into battle as a kid by lying about his age. He later got himself involved in some things that maybe weren't so savory before he became president. But nonetheless, he was the last guy who literally, was a nobody who became the president of the United States. Ever since him, if you weren't a general or in one of the right families, you don't even have a crack at it. And so it'll be curious to see if an outsider can really make a run for it, particularly an outsider who doesn't come from some kind of crazy wealth.
And we have the same problem in New York State. Everybody that has to have a lot of money to run in Senate and legislative races and the governor's race.
Yeah, so you don't get a lot of new blood.
No.
We did have here in Pennsylvania a very interesting event actually recently where in a state senator's runoff, a pretty well-to-do businessman who's probably very conservative. I want to say Tea Party type, but not the bad way. Down in York, Pennsylvania, who ran in the Republican Party, ginned up a special election, had the governor sign off on it because they wanted to get their hand-picked guy rammed through. And this guy didn't make the ballot because of the way they set up the special election. And he ran a write-in campaign and won it. And part of the reason he won it is it was just such naked politics to ram somebody into the position that people went out of their way to vote in this primary, in this special election to place this guy back in the seat. Now they have to go through a regular election cycle now, but nonetheless, it's one of the first write-ins to win a major election in a long time, and it helped that it was a special election, so there wasn't any other clutter. You know what I mean? Because people like to pull that R lever or the D lever, and then just forget about all the fine-grained choices. And I don't think he would have had such a shot if it had been a general election or even a primary. But the special election, the write-in candidate actually won. But that's even under those circumstances, that's almost the exception to the rule that proves there is a rule about write-ins.
Right. Correct. I know. Politics has become a very intense thing that it's very difficult to follow. Very difficult to follow.
So I don't want to keep you all night, but I want to just check on a couple of. How's your garden doing?
My garden is great. I don't have my beans in yet, but I do have all of the tomato plants and the all the other things, the herbs and zucchini and things like that, and hopefully they will grow. I just noticed a big fat woodchuck about half a block down from us living underneath somebody's porch, and I sure hope he doesn't decide to take a tour of the gardens.
Well, if there's a real problem with the woodchuck, I think we have some friends you can contact who may be able to arrange a removal operation.
Right, we put him in a different place.
Yeah. When there's a lot less light.
The garden is fine, and my flowers around the outside of the house look great with the new mulch and everything down. So
good. I'm
happy.
Good. Well, anyhow, I'm going to be doing this for a couple more hours down here. We get some calls here soon, and I'll be talking with those folks. I'm trying to get people's opinion on how they feel about the Tea Party and the Republicans and how this is all going to play out. The other one we're going to talk about, Mom, by the way, and I'll mention this to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Is if you drop the N-word and say it and even secretly record it and it becomes scandalous and horrible, apparently you can still somehow be able to solicit a $2 billion offer to sell your sports franchise that nobody else claimed was worth $600 million beforehand. And so I think the moral of the story is yes, you can say something terribly racist and be outed at it in public, and then somehow if they are going to strip your team from you, you'll end up with more money than anybody else has ever gotten for an NBA franchise ever. And I thought that was the end of the story because that's what came out the other day when Steve Ballmer's $2 billion offer.
Made his offer.
Yeah, made his offer $2 billion. But then Sterling just decided to sue the NBA on Friday for $1 billion, saying that his ouster is illegal. So I suspect this guy's going to take his $2 billion because they're going to go through with the transaction, and then his lawyers are going to go back and say, "Hey, I still need another $1 billion for my losses," and the NBA is going to pay him another $200 or $300 million to go quietly into the night. Because if I were his lawyer, what I would be doing is dragging out every other racist thing every other NBA owner's ever remotely done, but nobody knows about, and that would be part of my defense in the lawsuit. And so it's going to be such a dirty, scandalous thing that they're not going to want to go forward with it. And it turns out, I read a little bit about this guy. He's a lawyer by trade, and he's very litigious. And he and his wife have sued like dry cleaners over like $100 bills, as well as suing former employees over millions and millions of dollars, and suing his mistress over millions of dollars. But nonetheless, he's not the kind of guy, when he says he's going to sue you and he's going to drag it out and it's going to be scandalous, he's not the guy who's bluffing.
No, I guess not. It doesn't sound like it. My goodness. So that will certainly be something to watch.
Well, and what I'm wondering about is that going to blow apart? Is that lawsuit going to somehow blow apart the deal with Ballmer, or will that go forward? But the conventional wisdom is that the NBA owners are going to ratify this thing as fast as they can, if for no other reason than to actually have a team change hands for $2 billion, because they basically all just made an extra 50% bump up on whatever they thought the worth of their teams were at the moment, if not more than that. So it's interesting. I don't think, by the way, in all fairness, the fact that Sterling said something horribly idiotic caused all this to happen per se. There must have been some pent-up demand for NBA teams for somebody to bid this much. And, of course, it is the second largest or first largest television market in the U.S. I think it's the second largest, L.A. So there's a lot of reasons to pay a lot of money for it, but it's still way off the hook. And, of course, my joke about that is what's the lesson, right? If the object lesson, well, if you drop out of college, you can become a Steve Jobs or a Bill Gates. If you stay in college, as I was telling my nephew the other day, who's in college currently, much to his father's horror, I was saying, you realize that by completing your education, you're more or less guaranteeing you'll never become a billionaire, except for
that if you look at the background of a lot of the people that are very, very business oriented and very, very wealthy, you'll find that they don't have, many of them do not have formal education beyond high school.
Yeah, and then when they did get to college and they were catching some wind, I'm supposed to ask you what you planted this year, but we know it was beans. I'm sorry, I just got a request.
Well, we're going to plant beans. We planted zucchinis and a lot of cucumbers, and I planted dill and thyme and Italian parsley and let's see what else. Oh, cilantro, because we like that, because we put it in our guacamole. And I think you have a recipe for that.
I do. I have your recipe. In fact, they'll be looking for it online, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I'm going to plant, I have heirloom tomatoes that I started. They're not quite ready to put in yet. So I'm going to give them a try in about another week and a half and put those in. I don't have a large garden space, but I have boxes that are raised, and they work beautifully, and I have cloth over them that's permeable, and water goes through it, so I keep the weeds down that way without having to keep weeding and hoeing and all that kind of stuff.
Are you going to?
So
Are you planting some lettuces or anything?
I hadn't planned on it. If I get down at the end of this week to one of the farm places where they have stuff started already, I will pick up some lettuce, and I will try to do that just a little bit. I don't use a lot of lettuce all the time. I don't use it all the time, so it kind of gets wasted in my garden. At least last year it did.
Yeah, and it can grow pretty prolifically when it gets going, so it's hard to keep it baby. Yeah,
yeah. So that's where I'm at. Peppers. I planted. I think I planted some hot jalapeno peppers, and the rest of them are bell peppers. And hopefully last year they grew very well. I hope this year they do the same.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I'll get you a picture. I need to send it to you because Anson's pea plant actually produced some peas already. So he was
really,
yeah,
how wonderful!
And he was excited enough to actually go, oh, can I eat them? And I'm like, well, you could buy 10,000 bags of frozen peas and 1 million cans of peas and never get him to eat one. So I'm like, well, of course. So he ate about 5 of them and thought they were good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
That's good to hear because that means that he'll grow to like those kind of things.
Well, yeah, that was
wonderful.
the whole point, by the way. That was the whole point of making a garden for him and going to great pains to have him, put in quotes, help. Because as you know, a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, or in this case, this year, a 4-year-old helping you garden is a euphemism for it takes longer.
That's right.
But for him, it was, an opportunity to and then I pointed out his carrots, and he's like, "Whoa, can I try one of those when they're grown too?" And I'm like, "Well, of course." So the idea is to teach them the value of a garden and how to do it and keep their interest up.
That's right.
But also because you can get them interested in some food that I think, they wouldn't otherwise try, but by the fact that they grew it themselves, and then they realize it's not nearly as yucky as their friends at school told them. So
that's right. Absolutely. Well, listen. It's been nice talking to you.
Enjoy the weather, Mother. Love you. We will talk to you later.
I will.
We'll be back
Love you.
We'll be back on Wednesday night. We may call you and bug you then, but if not, we'll bug you next Sunday. Okay.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, that was my dear mother with the Western New York report. So we just wanted to check in on her and see what was going on up there. Get down her garden, and of course, those of you who followed my mom over the years know she's quite the gardener. And don't let her. I only have a few raised beds. She grows quite a selection and quite a good amount of plants every year. The heirloom tomatoes are always really good, and in fact, I sometimes think that I have to get up there in the summertime, just about the time the tomatoes are ready. But that's a few weeks behind. They're in that burpee growing zone above the one here in Pennsylvania, so they really don't plant up there en masse until Memorial Day. In fact, that's a big gardening day up that weekend. Memorial Day weekend is a big gardening weekend up there in Western New York when a lot of people plant their stuff because you're safe from a frost and you got a long weekend, and it just kind of creates a time schedule for that. Whereas down here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, you could put some plants out as they say Mother's Day is around safe. This year I planted a couple things actually at Easter time, although the weather was so miserable it didn't frost, but you might as well have left them in the greenhouse and got another 8 inches out of them before you put them in the ground. So there was no bonus to planting early this year, but you could get away with planting at Easter time because our last hard frost was just before that. But then again, this isn't really a show about gardening or planting, so we won't go on and on. But if you guys want to do that sometime, you let me know, and we could always do a little ditty about your gardens or talk about your aphids or those sorts of things. 717-916-5189 if you want to get it here on the air. Again, 717-916-5189. We'll take your calls, whatever you guys want to talk about. But, of course, I'm still hung up on what the Republican Party is going to do. Is it going to be Jeb? I kind of like Jeb Bush, right? Am I falling for the oligarchy? Of course, he came out with those comments about immigration, and I know some of you have very strong feelings about immigration and how we should be handling those issues. My grandmother, who was an immigrant, God rest her soul, passed away many years ago, had very strong feelings about immigration as well, having come here legally and done a lot of things, jumping through a lot of hoops in order to establish that legal residency and ultimately get her citizenship, including learning to speak English and read and write it and doing all kinds of other things, and also saving up a lot of money before she was allowed to bring her son over, who ironically is my father, or not coincidentally, I should say. That left her with a bad taste in her mouth about just sort of giving everybody a free pass to stay here. On the other hand, Ronald Reagan was all about amnesty, and of course he's the demigod of the Republican Party. I always find it interesting that the party of Reagan, or it's been called the party of Reagan, quite often will espouse views that I know Ronald Reagan actually didn't take the same position on ultimately. But then again, that's because Reagan used to say, and I think one of the callers may have pointed this out before, that he would say, if I can't get a loaf of bread, at least I can get half a loaf of bread. I think I'm better off if I have that. Basically saying getting some of what you want is better than getting nothing of what you want, which is the argument against this new thing called gridlock. Although I don't really think gridlock's new, and I don't think government inaction is new, and I'm not convinced that it's a bad thing. In fact, in my mind, I prefer the fact that our government is quite often at loggerheads and unable to move forward, or else I think they would have regulated us to death even more than they have to date. We were just talking about that with my mom a minute ago, these boating regulations up in New York State. I guess somebody died or something happened. Let's just talk about how modern legislation works. If you own a really big oil company or a fracking operation and you buy off a governor, you can get some laws passed. And if you own an insurance company or you are a large insurance company, you can make sure the legislature cramps through some legislation that protects your interests and screws the policyholders. If you're a member of a public employees union, you can make sure that your people get in there and mix it up a little bit and help out and keep your situation go. Okay, we got a caller here. Let's take a call. Caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Carl, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. I don't know what's the topic you guys are on right now.
Oh, I've just been prattling on about a couple things: the Tea Party and the Republican Party, and is the Republican Party going to be dragged farther right by the Tea Party, or can the two sides in the Republican Party get together and find a candidate that's acceptable, but they could win a national election? And then the other one was Donald Sterling and how his dropping of the N-bomb has now turned him into being able to sell his team for $2 billion.
Yeah, well, first with the Tea Party, I would say that I know a lot of people that would be considered Tea Party-like people, whether they're my relatives or coworkers. And I think people like Hannity and some of the talk shows do a disservice because they have such a purity test now that even Ronald Reagan wouldn't pass it. So it's like they find something wrong with every candidate. They have to be, so ultra-conservative, it's kind of creates a rift between them and the moderates in the party, I think.
Right.
And I think it's a danger for the Republicans is that if they run somebody who's so conservative he can't win in the general election, are they willing to moderate and take a victory? You know what I mean?
Right.
But I don't know. That's a tough call. It's hard to say. I'll throw an oddball question. I'll throw a curveball. I wanted to ask you personally, I know that you're friends with Courtney Stauffer's father.
Yes.
On Facebook, I think you mentioned that. Personally, not him, but you, what did you think of that whole lake search, and did the effort satisfy you that the state police put in on that?
Okay, well, let me update. There's a woman missing, young lady from the Palmyra area, Courtney Stauffer. She went missing quite a while ago. I think it was a year ago, this past July, and without a trace. And there was a whole series of weird circumstances. The police were actually at her house the night she went and disappeared, sometime between when the police were there in the middle of the night and early morning, and so lots of interesting things. What I thought about it, and I'll be frank with you, was that when this young woman came forward with this new information, the most troubling troubling thing about it was she had been in contact with the government, and they kind of blew her off. And of course, they acted like, well, we didn't need to do anything with this information, but they didn't really have a great reason for it. Okay, it was sort of like they really weren't. My problem with the situation was I felt like the government was not taking it seriously and following down every lead or just assimilating any information they possibly could at the moment. And so we were glad that they searched the lake. And did they do a thorough search? I don't know. I know they did a fairly, sent a sonar boat around. I don't know if they actually dropped any divers in the water or not. And I understand their resistance, but one of the things was, like, for instance, the DA over there was saying, well, the cost, we don't want to do it because of cost. Well, it turns out there's no cost to the county. So then you wonder, like, did you really go out and ask about this stuff if you didn't know there was no cost? If you knew there was no cost, then why are you raising that as an objection? Just made me feel like they weren't taking everything seriously or running down all the leads as hard as they could. And
and I think Dave Arnold, I know he was on Laura LeBeau's show in Lebanon, and I don't know if West Shore people listen to that or not, but he was saying that the girl that came forward, they already talked to her, and that they could somehow, he claimed, contradict that whatever she said was not true or couldn't be true. Whether that's true or not, who knows? We don't know what, everything she said was, and, to the detectives and whatnot. But, I mean, I kind of followed that story from the whole way and all the different theories, and there's a lot of theories circulating around Palmyra about what happened to Courtney Stauffer, and a lot of people are left scratching their heads. They don't know, right? I don't think anybody really totally knows. There's been the theory about that bounty hunter and drug dealers and sold into sex slavery in Eastern Europe, and I just wondered, what does Carl Rominger, what is your theory? Or does the family have a theory of what it's frustrating.
You go back and you say, how can the police be out there? And then they leave, and then they come back and say, well, we knocked on the door, but there was no response, so we left again.
That seems bizarre from the start with that whole series of events.
And then, and I know this for a fact, there was a car place across the street that had video surveillance, okay? At some point, they occurred to them to go and say, hey, I wonder if we have anything on there. And I guess it never occurred to them to look at it themselves because they weren't really, in tune with it or whatever. And at some point, a month plus later, somebody knocks on their door when the police doing a canvass saying, oh, yeah, we were just wondering if you guys had any video. Well, of course, so much time's gone by that, as with any of these digital videos these days, most people only keep, like, for instance, in Lancaster County, if you're in the city, the video lasts for about 7 days. They have all those video cameras in the city. And once a week, 5 days or 7 days goes by, it's gone. Well, for a lot of private systems, it's 30 days. Because that's enough time to discover employee theft, or if there's a break-in, you only need a couple days, that sort of thing. But it had camera that would have shown the area outside, which actually you could see the house across the street, and it was